heard much from Professor Lee as well as Suren, who gave us an idea of what the BRI actually holds for Sri Lanka, or what the perceptions are, what the observations are, and somehow there are myths that were underlying factors in that survey. Professor Lee brought out some very interesting facets to BRI, and one area which he couldn't explain was the South Asian role that will be played in the BRI. Could I just start off, Professor Lee, asking you to explain very briefly what role South Asia has in the BRI?
BRI has 6 corridors, and 5 of the corridors going through or by South Asia, like the 21st century Maritime Silk Road. Along this Maritime Silk Road, China plans or already built 5 ports, including Gibraltar. So it's all along mostly along South Asian coastline, the ports. From Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and also Gibraltar. And about the corridor, China make the Belt and Road Initiative. One of the reasons is to make its inland provinces and western provinces, which are now very poor, becoming economically prosperous. So it made corridors linking to the Maritime Silk Road through all the South Asian countries like Yunnan, Chongqing, Sichuan, Tibet, Gansu, Xinjiang, and Qinghai provinces. They will build a corridor to the south and through the ports of South Asia, then they will reach Middle East, Mediterranean, European countries, and African countries easily. No more through Malacca Strait, no more through the controversial South China Sea, not even bypassing Hong Kong and the Shanghai ports. So China needs shortcut ports.
Thank you, Professor Lee. I'd like to just get into the impact that Sri Lanka will be impacted with, actually. Both Suren and Thea, maybe you could answer this. There's now a very palpable fear of China in Sri Lanka. We are seeing a larger presence, we're seeing larger investment, and even larger debt, given that we just got the news yesterday that there's a 1 billion loan being granted for the Central Expressway. Are these fears founded? How do we look at this? Do we look at it positively? Do we look at it with some realism involved?
So I'll take the debt issue first. I think already from a debt perspective, the country, if you look at the indirect facilities as well, it's around 83 or 84% to GDP. So I think that number is already there. But if you take this yesterday's announcement, it's not necessarily a direct outcome of BRI. That is an initiative which this country has taken probably to plug into that, right? But if you look at what is publicly available regarding the BRI over the last 3 years, most of it happens to be equity investments, right? And in terms of fears, I think I'd like to perhaps make 3 or 4 observations. The first thing is this initiative is not going to see outcomes in 12 months. You know, it's a time-bound thing. It's over a period of time. Like this comment was made about Sri Lanka tea replacing Chinese tea 200 years. If I just give 2 examples. The first thing is in the east, I think it was the port of Shandong, right? Today, this port, I think around 30 years ago, it started with 2,000 fishermen when China identified this. But I think in 2016, that city reached a GDP of $1 trillion, which was about $145 billion, which is the GDP more than 100 countries. It has surpassed, right? So from a perspective, and it has now become the one of the seventh most busiest ports in the world. But it has taken 30 years, right? Secondly, I think the professor mentioned about the Pakistani port. It's not Karachi, it's Gwadar, which is 700 miles west of Karachi, close to the Iranian border. It today only has 120,000 inhabitants. So I think, again, the positioning is to make that city as one of the most modern cities in the Middle Eastern region in the next decade. So it's a time-bound thing. The question is, I think the understanding has to be, it requires patience. That's point one. Secondly, from a Sri Lankan perspective, there is also the view that the current understanding is really B2B. The BRI is really B2B, but there is a huge opportunity for Sri Lankan SMEs to get into the B2C space. If you really look at China and if you look at BRI and look at e-commerce, if you look at the two biggest players, Alibaba and JD.com, at this point in time, we are using these sites to bring stuff into Sri Lanka. What we are not looking at is the opportunity of Hambantota as a port with that new zone coming in as a buffer opportunity to push Sri Lankan SMEs to push their stuff out into the world and maybe getting people like JD.com to come in to a place like Hambantota to warehouse and distribute to the rest of the world. They can easily plug into that system. So it's a mindset, but it's not going to happen overnight. And the third issue is about whether Chinese labor will come and swarm this place. I don't think there is any reason for China to bring in their labor like that and swamp, as long as the Sri Lankan skill levels of labor is also upscale to meet the
That's
demand.
where we're falling short at the moment.
Absolutely.
Surenj?
Yes, so I mean, good two examples by Tia. I would say, I mean, in short, we need to leverage the leveraging. I mean, if you can. If the leverage is high, you take Sri Lanka Incorporated as a company, one of those companies you're managing and you have a 80% leverage, what would you do? Would you give over your company to the bank, or you would leverage that to make goods, service them, pay off the loans and also grow? I mean, you have two options. I mean, which option we take would depend on probably not only the government, it has to depend on the private sector. So if Hambantota port goes similar way of the two examples cited by Tia, the GDP in Hambantota will be much more than GDP of Colombo very soon. So that's an option probably for all the companies, whether they want to leverage whatever investments coming from BRI or just sit and probably complain.
Sorry, sir, I also like to mention it's not only about what you get from the bill, but how you, in terms of leveraging. Again, if you look at the Pakistani example, whatever is just one aspect, the other one is the road which is going through it, connecting from the east to Iran. Now, in that space, I think up to date, the estimated investment in infrastructure by China in Pakistan is estimated around 50 billion US. And according to public information, more than 50% of that investment was not on the port or on the road, but it was in investing in 4,200 megawatts of renewable energy, which today addresses the entire renewable energy requirements of the Pakistani economy. So it was up to the Pakistani government to allow the road and the port, but to leverage and address a critical problem they have had for decades, which is power shortage. And that has come through equity. So that's another important point.
So does Sri Lanka realize the potential as a nation, and from the governance aspect also? Do we realize the potential that we can get out of the BRI?
So from what this survey reveals, obviously there is more information, I think, dissemination required. And also I think the requirement of preparing the country, including bureaucracy, civil service, in preparing for this change. And I think maybe at a more recent engagement with the Pathfinder Foundation, some of us put in this recommendation. For example, MOTSIT happens to be the main gateway between the government and funneling investment. Very good opportunities for the MOTSIT to set up a BRI list and use that as a key funneling point to garner the expertise in understanding and disseminating that information inward in the country in harnessing this process.
Dr. Ing, just stemming from that, what opportunities do you see for Sri Lanka?
Okay, thanks. Good morning. It's my honor to have a meeting here. It both gives me great pleasure and fills me with warmth to meet so many friends in Hilton Hotel in Sri Lanka. This is my first visit to Sri Lanka, so I felt warm in Sri Lanka except the weather, but also the Sri Lanka people. In the past 5 years, driven by the Belt and Road Initiative of China, China has made many projects in Sri Lanka, include highways, railways, ports, airports, and so on. Now, the cooperation on large projects between the two countries is moving smoothly. Today, I want to talk about the opportunities for Sri Lanka and the Belt and Road Initiative. There is a good saying in China, 天时地利人和, which is mean the biggest determinant of cooperation is being the right place at the right time with the right people. Now I think the cooperation between our two countries is being the right time at the right place and with the right people. Why? There are 3 reasons. First, the agency of economic development in our two countries joint promotes the economic development. The end of the Civil War in Sri Lanka is 2009, and China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative to increase country's economic development through production output. The economic development status of our two countries has shown strong complementarity. At present, the One Belt Road Initiative, advocated by China and supported by many countries in the world. The Belt and Road Initiative has been so successful because it meets the partner countries' urgent desire. The Belt and Road is China's initiative, but it belongs to other countries in the world. The idea came from China, but the benefits will flow to other countries, including Sri Lanka. So it's the right time for our two countries to one cooperation. And second, the geographical advantage for China and Sri Lanka. Although we know our two countries are geographically distant, but the economic history of the two countries is very long. Yes, before the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1956, the total trade volume between China and Sri Lanka was reckoned the second place in African countries' trade and second only to Japan. The China-Sri Lanka trade has accounted for the top 3 in terms of foreign trade volume in Sri Lanka. From the original rice and travel agreement, now China has made many progress in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka can export coconut oil species and other projects. So the one cooperation between the China and Sri Lanka has geographical advantages. And third, the development of the friendship between the two countries since ancient times, as early as Eastern Qing dynasty, in China, the Buddhist Fa Xian went to Sri Lanka to conduct a more than 2 years visit. After return home, he recorded detailed information about Sri Lanka's culture and the natural conditions, and also have bought large of the scriptures materials and translated into Chinese. Yesterday, I visited the Maritime Museum with Professor Li, and I saw there are many pictures and sculptures in museum. I can see Fa Xian in the museum. He came here to learn knowledge of Buddhism. When he lived, the Sri Lanka people took him off with solemn courtesy. So from Fa Xian to know, we can know many stories of the friendship between our two countries. So Sri Lanka and China are the right people for one cooperation. So I think this is an opportunity for Sri Lanka and the Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you
That's
very
all.
much,
Thanks.
Dr. Ying. Yep. Kelvin, just looking at the port city, where does it fit into the BRI?
Well, I think fellow panelists have all shared that the BRI itself is actually economic, the objective is for economic development. And of course what China is looking at is actually a win-win situation for both China and the various countries along the route. So the port city itself is a bit different from most of the projects along the route. Because as mentioned, most of the projects are actually infrastructure projects, either energy or transportation related. But Port City itself is actually more of a real estate project. We are a master plan development. So what we're looking at is actually more of a development of a new city that will be an extension of the existing CBD. So comparatively, we're a bit different in a sense in terms of what we're trying to do. A bit of background of what the project is about. We are actually a reclamation project, 269 hectares of reclamation. Eventually we'll have about 5.7 million square meters of GFA. Most of the asset classes within the project are actually commercial, retail, residential and hospitality. Comparatively, there are no industrial projects within the development, so this is mainly a city infrastructure project. The background of the project is actually a PPP, so if they are concerned that this is while we contribute the main investment, 1.4 billion US dollars, we are actually a 60-40 PPP project with the government of Sri Lanka. So there will be 40% of the land that will go to the government of Sri Lanka, while we take 60% of the developable plots. Yeah, so strategically, there are also some key developments within the project that are also beneficial. So accordingly, for instance, the future medical center, the future international school and convention center, these are all owned by the government of Sri Lanka, and we are also actively involved in sourcing for potential investors and operators to come in through international consultants to facilitate this. Yeah. So this is actually what the project's about.
Thank you, Kelvin. I'd like to open the floor out to questions. Could you just raise your arm? We'll get a microphone to you. You can. I think you can just go ahead.
Yeah, just on two aspects. One is there's a lot of concern when it comes to our public perception, I put it that way, when it comes to investments from China, that they bring even the water. So that kind of perception among the public, where the benefits of local use of material and local use of labor is not really put to use. So that is something which most probably China has to educate the masses to kind of more press campaigns in the national languages, English and Tamil. The second aspect is a lot of perception again on bribery and corruption, where when China comes compared to Western countries, they have a lot of companies which are bound by rules and regulations to go into countries and give bribes. But I don't know whether China also has regulations to prevent, when it comes to companies coming to Sri Lanka, that they are name and shame if they happen to give bribes. in the country they invest.
Just start off, maybe?
Sure. Okay. With regards to the first question, yeah, we do hear a lot of concerns with regards to that. But from an economic perspective, if we see we're actually putting down $1.4 billion overall for the project itself, and eventually the 25-year project for all the developments to come in, we expect a very conservative close to additional $13 billion for all the future developments. So from the economic perspective, there's a trickling effect subsequently that will actually benefit the local economy. While we have the initial investments done with the Chinese input, the subsequent beneficiary is still the local economy. And on top of that, for the project itself, we expect conservative 83,000 employment opportunities in the future when the project is fully developed. So this is one of the questions that, answers to the question. And just to add on, I'm actually not Chinese, I'm actually Singaporean. So from there, there's an international perspective to the project itself, and also some contribution from other nationalities as well. Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask.
Yeah, that is why I'm not talking about both city. Both city, I know a lot of
Sure.
people are working, and you are not following that particular concern at all. Whereas my question was to the professor.
Sure.
Basically, they need to do a lot more in Sri Lanka to address these concerns.
Yeah, Professor, two-part question. One is where does China stand on bribery and corruption? And secondly, when China does have projects running through various countries, like in Sri Lanka, we are very frightened when we see that much Chinese presence in the country. Does it mean that China brings everything, including its manpower, and set up your projects? Or is it that there is always an engagement on both sides?
I talk about the no-fear behavior, where the Chinese greatest monk Fa Xian started. The fear is in your heart, not from the reality. Now the fear is created by the media agenda. And the Chinese government and the Chinese businessmen don't know how to handle the media agenda. The biggest barrier is language problem. In your country, English is a normal country. In China, English, no one speaks English in China at all. That's the biggest problem. And China, I talk with some top businessmen in China about what kind of country they like to make big investment. They want to see the country must have a stable government, a stable ruling party. And that country will not change its policy easily. Just like China. A policy will stand there for many decades. So China become one of the most powerful countries in the world. That is what Xi Jinping said, that we think about the China road, China model, China theory, and the China system. So when we talk about this problem, let's forget about the West concern about China. Talk about it based on Asian value to judge about ourselves and judge about China.
Any other questions?
Just on the line. In Hambantota agreement, no Sri Lankan company can go. It has only one Sri Lankan company which is existing, and that agreement is very clearly says that company have to be removed. I can name the company, it's Laugh Gas. Right? So this is the fear we have. It's not the cultures of each other, Asian, Buddhism. That's not what we are worried about. how are we going to face the future of this country as if it is politicized? That's our fear.
I would try to respond by saying, I think we have got to blame ourselves for that. And I think even if we address this other issue on bribery and corruption, this is our sovereign land, this is our nation. It's up to us within the regulatory framework when we engage, whether it is to protect our sovereignty or whether it is to protect our value system, when the state engages in this process, that you set the rules of the game. But just to also, speaking about this information, about the role of China in the recent times, about bribery, I think if you go into the public domain in the last month, the state has executed more than 24 public officials in public for bribery. So then they're gone the other way around, and that's in public domain. Right.
Questions? We can.
So, some of the aspects are obviously covered with these 5 strategic priorities. I think, like Tia said, maybe policy coordination should have been a priority at the point these were executed. Maybe time to relook at it on an intergovernmental level. Some of the other fears are something we call the people-to-people bonds have to be improved again. That's also highlighted as one of the priorities which need to go along with the BRI. And the third one which someone raised is something to do with unimpeded trade, whether government also can come up with policies to encourage trade both ways. I mean, Thea talked about Alibaba and we are buying only one way, but again, unimpeded trade is possible. Policy has to be developed, policy coordination is important, but corporates also could play a role through chambers and various promoters, associations to bring this to light. Yeah?
Just one question I would like to ask Thea is, as the head of the Chamber of Commerce and having the pulse of the private sector with you, are we ready for this?
I think it's an evolving continuum. I think the key thing people in the room have to ask yourself is, when you look at your own companies, how many of you have actually factored this in your next 5-year strategic plan or annual business plan? If you haven't, I think it's time you start to think. But I would also like to leave one other parting thought. This has nothing to do with business, because this happens to be ACCA and KPMG, just to leave a thought on the accounting side of it. With BRI, I think it's time the accounting profession here started to see as to how you want to plug into this, because I can tell you where I think even ACCA, but more importantly the CIMA and CGMA, has recognized the importance of this market, and they have gone away from exams. And they're even wooing the top level CFOs in China by inviting them, giving them honorary membership, and then using them as the influencers to go down the line. So I think that's a lesson I think Sri Lanka has to learn.
I think from the ACCA side, obviously there is a lot of thought leadership and research being done on BRI, and also, like I said, eventually they will go IFRS route. So in terms of professional education or accounting, ACCA probably ranks on top in terms of the knowledge on IFRS per se. On the accounting side, we've also, as KPMG also has published several thought leaderships to try and increase awareness, encourage companies to look at it. They've started with Hong Kong, China, and then they're going down the belt to see, to improve this kind of awareness to tackle the future. But hopefully we are, on an IFRS perspective, I think with the joint committee working in China, they will also embrace IFRS and make it easier on the world as a profession, I think.
Just as a closing thought, and maybe Thea can respond to this, we somehow seem to have missed the bus again. And by we, I mean the private sector. Somehow we wait for government to do things. The infrastructure investment that has come in is government to government. But again, can I just ask you, why isn't the private sector a little more dynamic and a little more visionary, knowing that this is going to be a reality and it's not just some myth that is going to happen eventually?
I'm not sure that that is strictly true, Savitri. I think maybe, again, it's probably the lack of communication from between people in the room as well as private sector as to what they are respectively doing. I don't think that there is complete lack of awareness, and individual companies, I'm sure, all five fingers are not alike, but there are people who are looking at this. I can tell you at least one of the big 5 or 6 banks about 3-4 years ago, when they started to look at this particular challenge in their strategic plan, one group came out, and I think I told this to you yesterday, and they actually had a name for Sri Lanka. They actually had it, they called it Chindia, recognizing the importance of China, Indonesia and India. And that particular bank set up its China desk about 3 years ago. So I think each organization, I'm sure, has different levels of understanding and embracing it. But I don't think it's correct to say that we have missed the bus, but it's an ever-evolving opportunity.
All right, so thank you to my panelists. We could have spoken, I think, for another half an hour or so, but I guess people have to get back to work. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Adrian?
Thank you. I must thank the panelists. Now I would like to call Nilusha, country head of ACCS, to hand over the tokens of appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a nice day.